This is BBC World News. The following programme contains scenes that you may find distressing.
This road is very important to a lot of survivors, as when you look out on this road, you always hope to see your parents coming to get you. "6 years old, I was imprisoned here. I was imprisoned here, I was put here. And I did my time."
For more than 100 years, Canada's Indigenous children were sent to state-sponsored residential schools. The discovery of unmarked graves at some of these sites has shaken the country and focused international attention on the neglect and abuse they faced. Isidore Poorman has returned to the school he attended in the late 1970s. Muskowgon is the last residential school still standing in the province of Saskatchewan. It was part of a nationwide system funded by the government, but often run by the Catholic Church.
This is the first time I seen the church and the first time I seen a priest standing over there when I was a little boy. The pews on both sides going down. Come and sat in here with my brothers on Sundays because we're forced to. Just the birds here now.
The policy was to assimilate Indigenous children by taking them from their families and forcing them to abandon their traditions and language. Cultural genocide is what an official commission called it.
I got hit like everybody else that spoke the language here. We got beaten. It's hard to come back to a place where you're abused. This is where we slept. This is the dorm room. Like I remember one night laying here, and they never had anything on the windows. They just had them straight open like this. So we always had like moonlight, a little bit of light coming in here, and then they'd turn off the lights and it'd get dark, and it'd be dark in here and a little bit of moonlight, and the boys would all be around giggling or trying to go to sleep and tell them to go to bed. But then when one boy would start off a cry, it'll make us all cry. It was a lonesome cry. And for that reason, that boy would get beaten up for making everybody else cry. Don't cry anymore. This is the one I told you that some kids have killed themselves.
Sometimes the abuse became too much. In this room, Isidore says, one boy hung himself. A number of unmarked graves have been found near the school. Stories of such graves were common among the students. Also, stories that children were forced to dig them.
And it was the son of a survivor, and he told me that his dad buried a kid over there, just over those hills.
A child from the school?
A child from the school. He buried a child over there. On the other side of the hockey rink, over the hill, he said. So that's what I know about only that one story. That's how come I think it's important for survivors to tell their story, so it doesn't go missing, and maybe that one child can be found.
Researchers made the discoveries 3 years ago. Since then, more Indigenous communities have been conducting searches.
The work at Muskowgon is nowhere near complete. We did a very preliminary survey. We found some indications, but there's also a cemetery not that far away, and there's other parts of the grounds that need future searching. I would not be at all surprised to find more, and potentially many more.
Do you have any sense of how long it will take till the possible sites are searched and we get a clearer picture of what's actually out there?
I think it'll be years. Mm-hmm. I think if we look at the number of schools, the scope of the work, the size of the landscapes that communities want to search, And that's just to find the locations of possible graves. I still think even that will probably take years because certain communities are just starting this process now.
More than 150,000 children were pressed into the schools and molded into the ways and religion of the European settlers. The buildings were overcrowded, the children often malnourished. There was disease and harsh punishment. Death was common, and the bodies were seldom sent back home. Many families were never notified. Generations of survivors have told stories about the missing children. Now they have proof. The nation has been shocked by the findings on the grounds of former residential schools in Kamloops, British Columbia, and here in southern Saskatchewan. Evidence of more than 1,000 grave sites so far, most of them children.
The discovery of the unmarked graves has built momentum to search for the truth across Canada. It's hard to say what the scale of that truth will be, but it is already forcing the country to face the incredible burden of its past.
It's not that the colonial legacy was unknown, or that the government had failed to act. In 2005, it agreed to compensate thousands of residential school survivors, the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. In 2008, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper issued a formal apology.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to offer an apology to former students of Indian residential schools.
Crucially, a commission was set up. For 6 years, it heard testimony from across the country, then issued a damning report in 2015. But this moment feels different. A lot of Canadians say they didn't know just how bad the abuse had been. And the revelations coincided with Canada's National Day. Many celebrations were cancelled or replaced with rallies honouring residential school victims and survivors. The way forward is uncertain. Technology has opened up possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar detects disturbances in the soil where the graves lie. But it scans the earth. It doesn't dig anything up. What comes next could be more difficult.
It's possible you can identify who these children are, but you'd have to have living relatives who would be able to contribute DNA samples, for example. Cause of death is really tricky. I think some communities, it will be enough to find the locations, to commemorate, to mark, and to leave them be, and others will pursue other things. There's a number of complications. There's jurisdictional questions around that. We hear a lot of conversation around these being considered crime scenes and criminal investigations.
Indigenous leaders are demanding accountability, full access to historical records, a public inquiry, even an international investigation.
There was a crime against humanity, a crime against children that no one should ever face. There was torture, abuse, and death in those institutions. And someone, somewhere, must face the consequences of first-degree murder, because that's what happened in many of these places.
The graves of the missing children have opened the floodgates of memory for survivors. More are speaking about their time at the schools, reliving the trauma, talking about it openly like never before.
At least we know now what happened to this. The students and that did not return to school. The ones who did not return home. We never talked about it.
You never talked about it?
We never talked about it, no. Just kept silent. Because we were afraid. We were afraid if we talked about it, if we went back to school, then we would be punished for it.
One of the books that I wrote was...
Herman Michel gained the confidence to speak out when he entered university. Academia gave him distance from the horror.
I was severely sexually abused. I was 5 years old. Yes.
Was it a teacher or somebody in authority at the school, I guess, or a priest?
It was people in authority. Yeah. So there was priests that done that, there's nuns that done that, there were supervisors that done that, and there was also older students that were doing that. And so it's a mess. It took me a long time to actually come out of my shell, to talk about what happened to me. And it's only from listening to other people talking and sharing where I began to find the security to be able to say, me too.
For many, though, there is anger. In this summer of reckoning, protesters unleashed their fury at symbols of Canada's colonial past, pulling down statues of Queens Elizabeth and Victoria. Fury also with the church. More than a dozen buildings have been destroyed or damaged by fire. Others have been vandalized. There are renewed calls for the Vatican to issue an official apology from Indigenous people, the Prime Minister, and local Catholic leaders. The Pope hasn't done so, at least not yet.
So many have expressed a profound desire for Pope Francis to come here to hear their stories, to touch the land where this happened, and to engage and to apologize. And I hear their desire, and I believe he will hear their desire. But apologies are not enough. Apologies need to lead to engagement, need to lead to solidarity, need to lead to positive actions as Indigenous people seek justice to address the various ways in which they experience injustice, ways in which they're on the losing end of social indicators of well-being in so many ways in this country. That's how we get to reconciliation.
The government has been criticized as slow to deliver on promises of support to find the missing children and secure their remains. It has now released $27 million, and the Prime Minister says there will be more to come. In the meantime, he's urging Canadians to collectively re-examine their history.
As we talk about reconciliation today, it is not just about Indigenous peoples and governments who wronged them, although that's certainly a part of it. It's also about non-Indigenous Canadians understanding that not only what generations of Canadians were taught was wrong, but it was harmful. And it led to the creation of policies and institutions and ways of doing things in this country that didn't respect, acknowledge, or value the extraordinary strength and worth and contributions of Indigenous people, of Indigenous communities, of Indigenous knowledge.
The goal of Canada's founders was to take the Indian out of the child. That didn't work. The residential school system did immeasurable damage, but it didn't destroy the Indigenous culture or the people. And what they lived through is living on in a new way.
My daughter cried when she heard about Kamloops. It drawn us all closer. She looks at me now, I understand that. I'm beginning to understand. I never talk about that to them.
But you are now.
Yes, I am now.
That's important, no?
Yes. Yeah. The same thing with my grandchildren.
Please help me welcome our chair.
For the longest time, there's been commission after commission, there's been study after study.
Do you think that will change now, given what you found?
I think so. I think Canadians are listening. There's more freedom now for educators to really teach about what has happened. But we have a responsibility as well as First Nations people to set the record straight. to create the curriculum that we need so that no child should ever have to experience what happened to us.
Yes. And I guess the unmarked graves are a particularly brutal history lesson.
You bet. You bet. It's sad. But there's also freedom involved in the truth-taking. So.
Canada's truth has been shaped by the victors. But for its Indigenous citizens, the past is not behind them. It's all around them. And they are speaking louder now, with the voices of survivors and echoes of the dead. Only if the country listens and remembers would it be able to share this terrible weight of history.